Welcome to the online course titled Producing Effective Policy Briefs. This is Module 1 and follows our short introduction to the course. My name is Renata Serra. I'm faculty in the Center for African Studies at the University of Florida, and I lead the Enabling Environment cross-cutting theme for the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems.
Hello, my name is Pierre-William Blanc, and I'm a research assistant for the Enabling Environment cross-cutting team in the Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems at the University of Florida.
Together, we worked to produce this video for you. This first module is titled How to Write a Policy Brief. It has 3 learning objectives. By the end of this course, you should be able to understand the importance of having a policy brief, analyze the main elements of a policy brief, and finally, produce your own policy brief. This is the outline of this module, which reflects the 3 learning objectives just stated. A policy brief can be described as a clear and concise standalone document that addresses a relevant issue and provides evidence-based policy options or recommendations. There are many reasons why you should consider writing a policy brief towards the end of your research or project. Some of them are to communicate findings and transfer knowledge from your research or project, to help relevant actors, especially policymakers, make informed decisions, and in some cases, to provide persuasive advice to a target audience so they can adopt a particular course of action for addressing a given problem. Now, since the goal of a policy brief is to improve decision-making, not in general, but by a specific group of people, it is important you decide before starting writing who your target audience is. You may have identified your stakeholders at the beginning of your project through one of the existing stakeholder mapping tools. Stakeholders are the actors who have a stake in, may affect, or be affected by the policy implications of your project. They may include state agencies, local governments, extension, industry leaders, civil society, and so on. However, for a given policy brief focusing on one specific issue, your target audience may be just a state agency or the extension services. If you want to address your recommendations to multiple actors, consider producing more than one policy brief, each with their target audience, rather than a generic policy brief targeting too many actors. In order to be effective, your policy brief should incorporate some key qualities. It should be focused on a specific issue or problem which is of interest to your target audience. Be clearly expressed. Use plain language, avoid jargons and other technical terms. Evidence-based. Focus on providing facts and make sure your recommendations flow from your research results. Accessible to target audiences. If there are people with different abilities, make sure they can easily access your document, either through print or online methods, and they're able to navigate through your policy brief. Finally, be action and policy oriented. Bear in mind that the policy brief is not about your research or project, but it should ultimately contribute to address a problem or improving an issue. Most policy briefs fall into one of 2 categories based on type and goals of the recommendations. These are advocacy briefs, which aim to persuade the target audience to adopt a particular approach or course of actions. Objective briefs instead provide balanced information on alternative policy options. We provide one example for each category in the resource associated with this course. Now Pierre-William will take over to explain how to structure a policy brief.
There are no specific agreements on the ideal length or format of a policy brief, but a reasonable recommendation is to keep the length between 2 to 4 pages, which correspond to about 1,000 to 2,000 words. On the slide, we have an illustration of a policy brief. We have 9 sections to show visually the approximate length or weight of each section. If we read the template from the top to bottom, we have the title, executive summary, key messages, introduction, methods and results, policy implication and recommendation, conclusion, references and further reading, acknowledgement, and publication details. We'll have a closer look at each section in the next slides. A good title should be short, descriptive, and catchy. A few ways to achieve this is by asking an enticing question, as in the first example here. Why population growth matters for sustainable development. Illustrating the main topics discussed in the brief, for instance, population, food security, nutrition, and sustainable development. Using a main title for a general overview and a subtitle, as in the example given in the bottom of the slide. Rising food prices, a global crisis. A summary should appear prominently on the first page for readers who want to grasp the content of the brief in the first 1 or 2 minutes. Try and use a simple and clear language that can be easily understood by your target audience. A good summary is one that describes the problem and context, summarizes key activities and intervention with simple words, explains the practical relevance, illustrating how the findings translate into practice and policy. Key messages are preferably presented in a numbered or bulleted format, as in the example given here. Think of 3 to 4 takeaways from your research or project. Keep the key messages as practical as possible. The introduction section, which can be also titled as background or rationale, introduces readers to the problem and context, justifying its relevance for policy attention or action.
There are different ways to articulate the central section of a policy brief, depending on your project. Here we present 2 common structures. The first is more appropriate for a research project. It starts by describing the study site, it continues with data collection and methods, and concludes with main results from the analysis. The second structure is more appropriate for action research or development projects. It describes the population characteristics, the interventions being conducted, and then the results obtained. The policy implications or recommendation sections is obviously very important to a policy brief. Its aim is to explain some of the practical steps for translating knowledge into actions and improving practices or policies. Whether you use a highly persuasive or a more neutral tone depends on what your project is about, as well as on your audience. Try and find a sense of where to strike the balance. In some cases, it is okay to use persuasive language, pointing to one particular approach or course of action, as you would do with an advocacy brief. In other cases, there may exist more than one course of action, or your stakeholders may not like to be told what to do. An objective brief that presents alternative options to pursue according to the circumstances may be the best way to go in such cases. In the example provided here, we struck a middle ground. The recommendations were intended for the Ministry of Livestock and Animal Production in Senegal, with whom we had worked all along the project. We knew that they were open to act upon their gender strategy, so it was okay to be pretty prescriptive. However, we never used language such as the ministry should do this or that, as we reputed it was not appropriate.
A conclusion section is optional, and many briefs do not have it, as they prefer to combine it with the policy implication and recommendation section. If you decide to have it in a separate section, be brief and effective in your conclusion. Avoid repeating points you stated earlier, and instead consider other ways to reaffirm the importance of your work and the wider effects in real life. Not all briefs include references or sources, but if you do so, try and include only few relevant ones. A policy brief is not directed at an academic audience, but few additional reading may be useful. You could also incorporate some hyperlinks in your reference list. Authorship, acknowledgements, and publication details are usually inserted at the end of the policy brief. Make sure you provide contact details so that your readers can contact you for more information. Verify the accuracy of the funding sponsors and grants. And remember to acknowledge the organization and individuals who have contributed to your project. Do not forget to add disclaimers and publisher info or logo.
Now that we have covered how the content of a policy brief is best structured, this and the next slide offer some tips on how to format the brief. The choice of the character font is not irrelevant, as fonts convey distinct impressions on the reader. Avoid elaborate or eccentric fonts and use instead simple and conventional fonts, such as those indicated here in the slide. Using font size of 12 points or larger is recommended for the text to be readable and accessible. Hyperlinks can be embedded within the text for easy access to relevant sources or websites. Throughout this presentation, we emphasize the importance of conveying the content of a policy brief in an accessible and appealing way. Long and continuous text can discourage readers. Consider converting heavy text into a bullet list, setting a separate box or sidebar for concepts and definitions, and describing results through graphics and charts. Photos of your team in this field or in the lab make the brief relatable and appealing. This concludes Module 1. We hope this material has helped you understand how to structure a policy brief and how to improve its format and readability.
If you have accessed the video through the UF online platform, take advantage of the resources on the site and complete the knowledge assessment at the end of this module.
We hope to see you for Module 2.
Thanks for your attention and goodbye.
Goodbye.